Welcome back to the Bob Fu Report. Today I want to talk about a very latest development in China regarding how the Communist Party tried to use some religious regulations and stipulations and laws to further its crackdown and persecution against all the independent religious faithfuls and organizations. So on December of 2021, the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party formally released the text of this so-called state religious internet content regulation. Basically put new restrictions on how the Chinese citizens, especially the religious faithfuls, to use online cyberspace to post the contents and how and who can put the contents. First of all, very interestingly and alarmingly, this new regulation, of course, next to the last one was the big regulation on religious affairs took effect on 2018. And that one was issued by the State Council and with lots of other government institutions involved. But this one was jointly actually issued by 5 different Communist Party and government entities. And they are State Administration of Religious Affairs, normally known as SARA, S-A-R-A. And it is basically the State Council's body of implementing any religious affairs. Then the second one is the National Internet Information Office. That office also has some almost unchecked power to examine, to censor, to regulate, to shut down any basically internet content, websites, affairs, anything on the cyber. They have the information, they have the authority to manage, including if they can shut down the Google. Google is not accessible anymore in China, like Yahoo, and they can just push one button, so nobody in China can get access to their Yahoo email. So that belongs to that office. Another one is the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. That is also a government, one of the ministries that regulate how the software is being developed and how much backdoors should be left open for the government security forces to check on you. And so that is the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. And the fourth one is the Ministry of Public Security. And the fifth one, surprisingly, is the Ministry of State Security, normally known as MSS. It's the equivalent of in the United States, like the CIA. So there are 2 security agencies, ministries, are part of this new law on regulating religious content on the internet. So this new law will take effect on March the 1st, 2022, and it really comes as a direct result of this Chinese Communist Party dictator Xi Jinping, his complaints about religious content online. So toward the end of the year, for 2021, there was a national so-called religious working conference organized by the Chinese Communist Party and, of course, the State Council on Religious Affairs, and all the 7 standing committee members of the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, led by Xi Jinping, were attending, and Xi made an important speech, basically decrying the danger of the internet, about the religious contents. So he warned, basically, the religious content has to be controlled, has to be regulated, had to be filtered, have to be purified. And he actually warned specifically, if we cannot, we means the Chinese Communist Party, cannot better control those contents on the internet, the existence of the party, the Chinese Communist Party, will be in jeopardy. So this is how dangerous of those religious contents in the eyes of the dictator, tyrant Xi Jinping. So let's see what are those new measures in this new regulations. I mean, there are 5 chapters. I mean, so this is 5 chapters. Here is a translation. And the Article 1 said to regulate internet religious information services and protect citizens' freedom of religious belief. These measures are formulated in accordance with the Network Security Law of the PRC and the Internet Information Service Management measures, the regulations on religious affairs, and other laws and regulations. So, on the letter of the law, it says, protect religious freedom. But it's all about so-called regulation. As we all know, it's just to put a rubber stamp in the name of the law to basically crack down and control how the religious message is transmitted online. And particularly the license, it specifically stipulate how the license will be permitted or regulated for anything to post anyone to post religious content online. And so it created a new license called the Internet Religious Information Service License. Basically, any organization who wants to post anything on religion or religious affairs have to apply for a special license from the Religious Affairs Management, or what I call we mentioned the SARA on the national level and on the provincial level. So the license, according to this new regulation, can only be permitted or issued by the provincial or above level of the Religious Affairs Bureau or the State Administration for Religious Affairs. Basically, only 2 levels of government, can be allowed to issue this kind of license. And it specifically said those licenses have to be consulted and obtained through the permission of the patriotic registered religious institutions. Now we all know in China, the Chinese Communist Party only allows so-called 5 religions exist for their existence, legally exist, and they are represented by the 5 so-called patriotic associations from Christianity, from Catholicism. Communist Party basically put them into as 2 different religions, Christianity and Catholicism or Catholics, and Daoism, Buddhism, and Islamic religion. So they are all controlled by these 5 patriotic associations. So certainly, if you're a house church, if you're a new religion like Falun Gong or any others faiths, you're not even allowed to apply for a license. And if you post any related content on the internet without a license, it's declared totally illegal. And what are the permitted licensed content? Well, it said you can post sermons and messages, but if they're licensed, but these sermons and license have to be regularly examined and checked for the so-called Sinicized content. As we know, the Sinicization campaign in the past 4 years, this is the 4th year, so next year will be the 5th year of the 5-year plan to Sinicize all religions and to Sinicize Christianity with Chinese Communist Party's characteristics, socialism. So your sermons has to be compatible with socialism and communism doctrines, and must not be critical of socialism or the Communist Party structure. And religious schools may post something online, but only to their own students, cannot be accessed by other people outside their students' body, and cannot promote online content to any minors. So in this regulation, basically any content you posted online regarding religious content, it is illegal for those who are under 18 years old to receive any religious education in any form, basically online. So certainly if even worship songs, Sunday school content are totally forbidden according to this new regulation. And Article 14 on this regulation, it also specifically stipulate what is illegal content with the license, and cannot be used to so-called incite subversion of state power, like Pastor Wang Yi was accused and received that 9 years imprisonment. And this so-called subversion of state power to CCP could means like if you promote the gospel spreading with the John 3:16, or the Great Commission of Matthew 28. These are all regarded as subversion of state power because you are essentially spreading the mission messages for other people to believe, and then to encourage others to share the gospel. And it said it cannot be used for conducting commercial information or propaganda in the name of religion, it is called. Well, this particular article, I think it specifically mentions this with the target of the pretext for criminalize the tithing and offering by the house churches. Because we already have seen some house church leaders receive like 12 years, 3 years, 4 years, and even recently 7 years, just simply for putting an offering box in their church. It's called illegal business management or business fraud in the name of illegal organization. So this kind of things are the intent for this new regulation. Some Chinese Christians, some circle already kind of responded with this new regulation with a chilling effect. Some chose to, when they are posting on their WeChat or on other social media, managed or observed or scrutinized by the Chinese internet police. It already used like AM to replace Amen. God in Chinese means 上帝, and they use SD or YS, something, a code name, so that it won't be picked up by the internet police. But many other Chinese church leaders, are already prepared, of course, preparing that, this is just another way to further the revival of God's church. When the Communist Party tried to use this and other means to scare Christians from further spreading the gospel, it means the Communist Party are very afraid, and how the Chinese Christians should be scared of, like the evangelist brother Chen Wensheng from Hunan province, and he's a street evangelist, and he kind of took on his social media, even criticized some Christians, said, "Oh, are we really too scared by just government releasing a new regulation that has not even taken effect until March the 1st, 2022. And so he basically posted some specific scriptures to encourage the brothers and sisters in China to stand firm. Like, Hebrew 10:35, he said, "Do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded." And Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, he used Paul's words from the prison. Said, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power." Because in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 said, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but give us the power, love, and self-discipline." So another translation, 2 Timothy, we all know, is that Paul basically instructed Timothy, who was a young evangelist, at the time said, the Spirit of God is not a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, love, and self-control. So may the Lord continue to bless his persecuted his church in China, and give them strength, and knowing that his spirit is not a spirit of intimidation, but a spirit of God's love, God's power, and self-control and self-discipline. So let's continue to pray for our brothers and sisters over there, and for all the persecuted faithfuls in the next wave of storm after March the 1st. And God's church certainly will continue to triumph.
Thank you, Bob, for that incredible report. Your perspective helps us contextualize the historical importance of what's happening in front of us in China. For those who don't know, Bob Fu was an underground pastor in China, so he knows a thing or two about religious persecution. In fact, he was an English teacher for Communist Party leaders by day, and riding around on his bicycle, ministering to his congregation by night. To find out more information about Bob Fu and how he escaped to America in the 90s, you can order his book, God's Double Agent, from any major retailer, or you can visit ChinaAid.org. I'm Jonathan Dingler, your co-host for the Bob Fu Report, and I'm going to be bringing you some reports from the front lines of religious persecution and rule of law in China. Now, our case today happens to be mostly associated with how Christians are persecuted by the law in China. Typically, in a Western sense, rule of law may mean something to us, but in the Chinese Communist Party, it's more of a rule by law, meaning whatever Xi Jinping says goes. Unfortunately, this has been the case for many years since he took office, and it continues to threaten the religious liberty of a lot of folks, including Pastor An Yunqi and Zhang Qinghao of a Reformed church in Shaanxi province. Now, these two Christians were arrested on suspicion of illegally crossing the national border back in 2020. But for our faithful viewers, this may sound like a very familiar case. Pastor John Sao, a very close friend of Bob Fu, was also arrested and charged with illegally crossing the national border and currently serves 7 years in prison for it. Now, when China Aid posts about these things on social media, or when we make just a brief mention of it on our website, typically we don't really go into why this charge of illegally crossing the border is a bogus charge, why it's a baseless charge. And that's mostly because it's hard to really contextualize, but essentially, Pastor John Sao, for example, he was building Bible schools in Myanmar for minority children, and these children were coming to Christ, and they were getting an education, and they were being saved, right? Somebody actually cared about them. But Pastor John Sao was using China as a resource. He would go from China to Myanmar and back over and across the border over and over. But Pastor John Sao had a legal passport from the PRC, from the People's Republic of China. He had, every legal avenue to do so. But the reason that he was arrested wasn't necessarily because he actually broke the law. It was because what he was doing, the Chinese Communist Party didn't want to be a part of it, and they didn't want their country to almost be supporting this religious activity. So when Pastor John Sao was arrested and given all of that time, there was really nothing that the courts could have done, or his lawyers could have done, to prevent, what the Communist Party wanted, which was for him to be in jail. Similarly, An Yunqi and Zhang Qinghao are both, as I said, from Shaanxi province. An Yunqi has been ministering to his house church for some time. They were arrested on suspicion of illegally crossing the border. And this directly links to 5 Christians who were arrested earlier last year for the same thing. They had attended a gospel and culture conference in Myanmar. They had, legal passports. They had legal visas. They returned, within the timeline that they were given. But when they returned, they were arrested. And a lot of these Christians actually were arrested after they had already returned, and they just came to visit their friends in jail. These Christians, they're put in prison because they're attending a religious activity outside of China, and the Communist Party doesn't really like that. So these Christians are in China, and they are awaiting their sentence. They've already gone through their trial. You can check out ChinaAid.org. They shared their faith during their trial. They testified during their trial. But they've yet to receive a verdict. So stay updated on our website to see how that turns out for them. Minister An Yunki, however, he was returning home in November. His wife and another couple had gotten done with church for the day, and they were coming home, and a bunch of plainclothes police officers were barging into An Yunki's house. And they had a warrant for his arrest. They were going to detain him, put him in the police station, and ask him questions. They were searching through his belongings. They had taken several, computers and personal cell phones, which at the time of recording this report have not yet been returned to An Yunki's wife in any capacity. So they took all of their belongings, all the personal laptops and cell phones, and they took An Yunki, briskly whisked him away to the police station. And it was a couple days until his wife even got the notice. Zhang Chenghao, very similar situation. His wife did not see him all day. She called the police office, police officers in the department, and tried to get some answers. And it wasn't until a couple days later that she received the notice in the mail that he was in jail for suspicion of illegally crossing the national border. The reason that these two cases are linked with the 5 Christians in An Yunki is mostly because they attend the same church. So these police officers are just trying to get as many people in trouble as they possibly can. An Yunki and Zhang Chenghao have not been able to meet their families or their lawyers at this point. The wives of these men wanted to bring their husbands' coats because it's very cold at this time in China during the winter. But they were unable to contact them. Their lawyers aren't able to ask them questions at this time. We're still waiting to see when a trial will be announced, but until then, stay tuned. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. Please check out our website to find out more about Christian persecution in China. And God bless. Have a good one.